Good morning. I'm going to be reading The Boys in the Boat, chapter 25, A Game of Cat and Mouse. Okay, we're on page 183. 183. I'm going to say it one more time because everyone always asks at least 3 times. 183. 183. 183. 183. Follow along. Okay, a game of cat and mouse. There were 14 8-oared crews, and each would have 2 chances to make it into the race for gold on August 14th. If a given crew won its preliminary race on August 12th, it would earn a spot in the medal round automatically. Each of the losing crews would race again on August 13th and would need to win that heat to advance to the final on the following day. For their preliminary race, the boys from Washington were assigned to row against France, Japan, Czechoslovakia, and the crew that they were most concerned about, Great Britain. Now that the boat was performing well, Ulrichsen backed off the training and told the boys to rest. This did little to help Don Hume, though. By race day, he was ill again. He had lost a total of 14 pounds. His 6'2" frame was down to skin and bones. His chest was still congested, and he was running a fever on and off. But he insisted he was ready to row. On the day of the preliminary, he stayed in bed until late afternoon when the boys boarded the bus for the race course. Conditions were almost ideal for rowing. The skies were lightly overcast, but the temperatures were in the low 70s. Only a hint of wind out of the Langer Sea ruffled the slate-gray water. The boys had been assigned to row in lane 1, the most protected from what little wind there was, so that's good. By the time Joe and the boys paddled to the starting line, some 25,000 people had entered the regatta grounds. The boys backed the Husky Clipper into position and waited. I lost it. Right next door, in lane 2, ran Lorry Noel Duckworth, and the rest of the British crew did the same. Duckworth nodded at Bobby Mock, and Mock returned the gesture. The race started, and the American boys got away badly again. Someone in the middle of the boat missed the water on the first or second stroke. In lane 4, the Japanese fluttered rapidly into the lead, whipping at the water. Noel Duckworth and Ran Laurie took the British boat out hard, but then eased up and settled into second place behind the Japanese. So the Japanese are winning. The United States was dead last. Once they got going, Mock and Hume kept the stroke rate high until they passed the Czechs. Then they eased up too. The Japanese stretched their lead over the British to a full length, but neither Mock nor Duckworth was thinking about the Japanese. They were thinking about each other. And until the halfway point, they held their positions. The exhausted Japanese suddenly began to fade. Too much sprint in the beginning. Along with the Czechs, so did the French. That left the Americans and the Brits right where they had expected to be, alone with each other at the front of the pack. Now it was a game of cat and mouse. Mock told Hume to edge the rate up slightly to see what would happen. Hume kicked it up to 36. The U.S. boat crept to within half a length of the British boat's stern. Duckworth glanced over his shoulder. He and Laurie picked up the pace. The British boat held its lead. The boys in both boats could now hear the roar of the crowd in the grandstands. The coxswains could see the finish line up ahead, but neither was ready to make his move yet. Both were holding back. Finally, with 250 meters to go, Mock shouted, "Now, boys, now! Give me 10!" The boys dug hard. The American flag, snapping at the front of the Husky Clipper, began to move past Duckworth, creeping halfway up the length of the British boat. For a moment, they held their positions, the white blades of the U.S. shell flashing furiously alongside the crimson blades of the British. Then Mock yelped at Hume to up the rate again, and the Clipper resumed advancing. The British remained out in front by half a length with 150 meters to go, but the American boys had found their swing, and they were holding on to it. They were rowing as hard as they had ever rowed, taking huge sweeping cuts at the water over and over again, rocking into the beat as if they were forged together. Every muscle, tendon, and ligament in their bodies was burning with pain, but they were rowing in perfect, flawless harmony. Nothing was going to stop them. In the last 20 strokes, they simply powered past the British boat. The American fans in the stands rose and cheered as the bow of the Husky Clipper knifed across the line a full 20 feet ahead of the British shell. A moment later, Don Hume, who had been sick, pitched forward and collapsed across his oar. It took Mock a full minute of splashing water on Hume's face before Hume was able to sit upright again and help paddle the shell over to the float. When they got there, though, the boys got sweet news. Their time, 6 minutes, 0.8 seconds, was a new Olympic and world record. Ulrichsen crouched down next to the boat and quietly said, "Well done, boys." As the boys tucked into their dinners that night at the police academy in Köpenick, they were jubilant. The British would have to row and win the next day to even make the finals, but the Americans would have a day off. Al Ulrichsen, though, remained deeply concerned. After dinner, he ordered Don Hume back to a sickbed. The boy looked like death. Whatever he had, it was clearly more than a cold. Maybe it was COVID. They didn't have that back then. Now Ulrichsen had to figure out who was going to stroke the boat when they raced again in 2 days. After lunch the next day, the boys wandered through town, joking, poking into shops, taking pictures, buying a few souvenirs, exploring corners of Köpenick they hadn't yet seen. Like most of the Americans in Berlin that summer, they had concluded that the new Germany was a pretty nice place. It was clean, the people were friendly, everything worked neatly and efficiently, and the girls were pretty. But there was a Germany the boys could not see, a Germany that was hidden from them. 3 years earlier, the waters of the Langer Sea, which is where, rowing happens, had been reddened with blood. In 1933, Nazi soldiers rounded up hundreds of Köpenick's Jews, Catholics, and others, tortured 91 of them to death, then dumped their bodies into the River Spree and the Langer Sea. And even as the boys explored the town to the north of Berlin, the Germans were already constructing a sprawling concentration camp. Tens of thousands of prisoners would soon die there. As the boys walked the streets that afternoon, they did not know that many of the locals they passed were doomed. People who waited on them in shops, old women strolling around the grounds of Köpenick's castle, mothers pushing baby carriages on cobblestone streets, children shrieking gleefully on playgrounds, old men walking dogs. Before long, many of them would be shipped off on trains, sent to their deaths. During the Olympics, though, the brutal reality of Nazi Germany was nearly invisible. To the athletes, Köpenick seemed to be about as pleasant and peaceful as anything back home in Washington. That evening, the boys went down to the course to watch the next set of races, the heats that would determine the final lineups for the medal race. Hungary and Switzerland were already through, and now Germany, Italy, and Great Britain had each won their races. The boys finally knew who they were going to have to beat to win gold. The one remaining question was which lane they would be assigned to. And when Al Ulrichsen found out, he was furious. Normally, the team with the top time earned the most favorable lane, so Ulrichsen figured that his boys would be rowing in lane 1, which was protected from the wind, because that's the good lane. Instead, the German Olympic Committee changed the rules for the finals. The Germans were given the best lane. What a surprise. Italy was in lane 2, and Switzerland was in lane 3. Hungary had lane 4, Great Britain was in lane 5, and the United States was all the way out in lane 6. The protected lanes went to the host country and her closest allies. The worst lanes went to her potential enemies, Great Britain and the United States. It was deeply suspicious, and just what Ulrichsen had feared since first seeing the course. If there was any kind of headwind that next day, his boys were going to have to make up as much as 2 boat lengths just to get even with the field. So Hitler and his people are kind of rigging this thing. The weather did not seem willing to cooperate. The next morning, a cold, steady rain was falling in Grinnell, and a blustery wind was whipping down the race course. At the police academy in Köpenick, the jubilation had evaporated. Don Hume was still in bed, his fever spiking once again. And Al Ulrichsen had decided he could not row. Don Coy, the substitute, would have to step into the shell again at the stroke position. Ulrichsen broke the news to Hume, and then to the others. At the breakfast table, the boys ate scrambled eggs and steak, sitting silently, their eyes seeing nothing and no one. This was the day that they had worked for all year. In fact, most had worked for 3 years to get here. Now it had all come down to one final race, and they were not going to be together. They began to talk it over, and the more they talked, the more certain they were. It just wasn't right. Hume had to be with them. They weren't just 9 guys in a boat. They were a single thing, a crew. They got up and went to Ulbrichtsen. Stub McMillan was the team captain now, so he cleared his throat and nervously stepped forward. Hume was absolutely vital to the rhythm of the boat, he told his coach. Nobody else could respond as quickly and as smoothly to the moment-by-moment adjustments that a crew had to make during the race. Bobby Mock piped up. He just had to have Hume sitting in front of him, responding to his calls, setting the pace. He and Hume could almost read each other's minds. Then Joe stepped forward. If you put him in the boat, Coach, we will pull him across the line. Just strap him in. He can just go along for the ride. Outside, a German army bus was waiting to take them down to Grinnell for the medal race. Ulbrichtsen told them to go get their gear. The boys began to troop upstairs. After a long few moments, Ulbrichtsen shouted up the stairwell after them. And bring Hume along with you. So, they're going to let him race in the big one. So that's the end of chapter 25. On Monday, we will read chapter 26. It's kind of a long one. And then the epilogue. So, see ya.